Okay, thanks everybody. Just thought we'd wait for a few more participants to enter the webinar before we kicked off. So good evening and welcome to you all. Thank you so much for tuning in to this important industry webinar number 2 from the team at the National Grower Transition to Management Program. I'm your host this evening. My name's Bianca Jiggins. I'm from the Australian Honeybee Industry Council, or ARBIC, which is the peak national representative body for the honeybee industry. I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations people as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters in which we live, work and play, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and future. Now, this evening's program, we have a lineup of presentations coming to you from a group of people involved in the Transition to Management program. So since the last webinar on the 30th of April, the team and I collated and reviewed several key questions from the webinar and included some traffic from the public information team from the response. And as a result, this presentation of topics has been brought together for this evening's webinar. So we have an overview of the response so far in the Transition to Management details from Tamara Prentice, the National T2M Coordinator with New South Wales DPI, an integrated pest management deep dive from Elizabeth Frost, Technical Specialist Honeybees, New South Wales Department, and a chemical treatment overview for Varroa from Danny Lefevre, our CEO from ARBIC. And then we'll follow on with a Q&A session, hopefully rounding up around 8:30 this evening. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. Tonight, we're anticipating several people online. So again, we're directing you to enter your questions into the Q&A function on the screen below. We encourage you to ask questions, but if you would like to wait till the speakers have completed their presentation, and save those pending questions, because sometimes we do cover the questions that pop up in the Q&A during the presentation itself. But feel free to put them in so that we can get back to you. So some of them will be answered directly live and the others live in the chat, and then the others will actually be provided at the end in the Q&A session to each particular presenter. So the webinar is being recorded and it'll be published online later on. So as before and all the other webinars we've hosted for the Transition to Management, it's important to remember that this information is presented as of today's date and is current now. But if you're watching in the future, please make sure you check the websites for up-to-date information. So I'd like to hand over to Tamara Prentice for an update on all of the activities within the Transition to Management program.
Thank you, Bianca. Let me know when I'm ready to start.
We're just going to get your screen going now. So just hold tight, sit tight, everybody.
Excellent.
Promise we haven't had a glitch in the system. If you're listening at home, hang tight.
Bianca, surely you have a joke up your sleeve for the moments like this?
I'm not very good with jokes. I can't remember any of them.
We were just asking whether we wanted elevator music or buzzing sounds perhaps in the background while we waited for people to join. We could have used that
pretty
music
appropriate
again now. I think so.
Sorry, we are nearly there.
Thanks, Jo. So I might, if people are happy to hear my voice and look at Bianca, that might work. There we go. So can you see me? Excellent. Okay. Sorry, I've got two screens on my one little screen, and so I couldn't quite see what was going on there. So my name's Tamara Prentice, for those of you who weren't at the last webinar, and I'm the National Program Coordinator for the Transition to Management Program. And I'm going to assume that some of you were at the last webinar and have a little bit of familiarity with the program. Next slide, please, Jo. So since the last program update, we've really been focusing on dual objectives. So we wanted to stay, the program staff to stay out in the field as much as possible to make the best use of the available time that we have. And I'll talk more about those in the field activities over the next few slides. But we've also been really, really busy in the background, trying to get the program governance right and get steps in place to get people on the ground in all of the other jurisdictions as well. So it doesn't sound super exciting, and to be honest, it's probably not. I'd much rather be out with a Hive tool, but anyway, that's my lot in life. So that's what we've been doing. So some of the things, just for your information, because often people go, oh, what's going on behind the desk there? What are all those bureaucrats up to? So just for your information, some of the things that we've been working on in the background, we've been working to develop memorandums of understanding with the other jurisdictions. And that sets out, for example, how much money each of the states and territories will have to deliver things like the Varroa development officers. And then in response to that, what information we need back to us so that we can demonstrate to the National Management Group what the program has been achieving across the nation. We do that through a document called a key performance indicator document. So the program's been going along in the background trying to set those performance program indicators as well as looking at our budget and making sure that we're performing on time and under budget where possible. We've also been working on recruitment for the pollination industry coordinator role. So this role description's now been finalised, which in government terms is a precursor to being able to actually advertise the role. So there's a lot of steps that have to happen before in government we're allowed to advertise. So hopefully that's in the very near future now. And I also hope to form a working group with some of the pollination dependent industries before that person commences. So I've started touching base with a few people in that space to make sure that we've got some clarity about what people want that role to achieve before someone comes on board so they can really hit the ground running. The key performance indicators are also used to make sure we don't forget things. So the program, as you know, it's got lots and lots of components, including a lot of little projects that we really haven't cast a lot of spotlight on just yet. So the KPIs make sure that we don't forget that sort of stuff. And we also have our teams working in the background. So we have the logistics team, for example, sending out pallets of equipment to other jurisdictions. We've got a WHS officer getting safe work method statement information prepared so that it's handy for the other jurisdictions as well. And on our next slide, we'll look at what the technical team have been up to. So next slide. Thank you, Jo. So the technical working team supports usually the weekly updating of the Varroa heat map, but they also develop insights for us into how Varroa is spreading so that we can be prepared for when we think it's going to hit other jurisdictions and the like. We can inform future training locations and we can make beekeepers aware as the incursion creeps outwards and inform our industries about what to expect and what to prepare for. So part of this work is mapping the number of positive reports we get, which you can see is starting to show an exponential increase. This was what we'd expected, but it's not great. Anyway, it is what's expected and it's what we'll see coming, but anyway, that's what it's doing. We had the thousandth positive report on the weekend, which was in Northwest Sydney. So yeah, not a great outcome, but that's what we've reached, and we'll keep you informed as that number of infected premises continues to creep up. What comes from that is that we expect to see the rate of spread increase. So in terms of slowing the spread, the spring of 2024 will be particularly crucial for monitoring and for appropriate treatment. So I'm sure you'll be fully across that after tonight's presentations. I mentioned the Varroa heat map before, but you might have also seen, which hopefully you've seen online, you might have also heard about a cool map. Queensland have a cool map, but our technical team also have a cool map, which they use in the background to inform some of the insights and analysis that they undertake. So the cool map and that's what's on the screen, the blue dots, it shows where reports have been submitted that Varroa is not present in a hive. That's really important for us so that we know particular areas are Varroa, well, we know parts of particular areas are Varroa free, but it also lets us track how much surveillance is actually being done out in the public space. What we've found, really interestingly, is that even after 18 months of known Varroa in an area, if there's only low mite loads in that area, some of the hives in that region can be maintained as Varroa free. So just because you hear of Varroa in your area, don't assume that you've actually got it in your hive. Make sure that you're doing hive surveillance yourself, because like I said, if your neighbour's got it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have. The technical team have also worked out that natural spread can be up to 3 kilometres. So that's not great, but generally that only occurs where you've got both really high mite loads and also there's quite a high number of infected premises around. So the mites are looking for somewhere else to go. The other thing is the mapping has shown a clear correlation between how long Varroa has been in an area and how high those mite loads are. So not surprisingly, but like around the Hunter and Central Coast areas, there's very high mite loads around there. And what you can see on the screen, just north of those dark blue dots around Sydney, is that there's less, this is a double negative, that there's more positive surveillance, so less negative results reported, which shows that there is more spread in those regions. Down in the bright blue dotted areas, there is Varroa present, but it's at low loads. And so the rate of spread is probably, or we're guessing, a lot lower based on the intel that we've collected. Next slide, please, Maestro. So what else are we doing actually out in the field? So out in the field, we have our Varroa development officers, and we spoke about these at the last program update. So they're employed to provide hands-on assistance to beekeepers. The roles are around the country. Currently, though, only New South Wales has got their VDOs on board. So VDOs, and I just wanted to give a bit more background around this. So VDOs can actually be employed until the 9th of February 2026. So they're one component of the plan, which was a 2-year commitment. And each jurisdiction had the option for how those employment contracts might work. So as an example, in South Australia, they're proposing to advertise for their VDOs later in June, and they will be for a period until 2026, so about 18 months until the end of the program. But see, New South Wales, they employed their VDOs in February 24, and so under the current funding arrangement, those VDOs will finish up in around February 2025. Victoria, for example, it's advertised currently for its VDOs. They'll be employed until 26, but Tas is advertising currently, but only for a period of 12 months. And so what the states have done is some of them might have put on, for example, in SA, they've got 6 full-time equivalent roles. So that's the FTE up there, but they might put on, the example would be 3 for a 12-month period and 3 for the next 12-month period, the equivalent of 6 full-time equivalents. The numbers might be slightly out here. These have changed a little bit, but you get a bit of an idea. So just because you haven't got a VDO in your area now, you will be getting one, and they might be around for until February 2026. I mentioned before that the program's time limited. There is some chance that the program might finish before Varroa gets to your area. So once your VDOs are on board, I'd really encourage you to get in quickly and learn how to deal with Varroa and take advantage of that training before our time runs out. And also the VDOs, there's only a few, as you can see, in each state. So if you're running an event like a club or an association meeting, yell out to the VDOs if they're on, because they love to get as much reach as possible. Next one, please, Maestro. I also wanted to mention what's been happening in the training space. So again, training will be available around the nation, and you can see the breakdown here on the screen. So the workshops were divided up by the size of the beekeeping industry in each jurisdiction. The training is led by contract trainers. So those contract trainers are employed through an expression of interest process. And currently that expression of interest process has been undertaken, obviously in New South Wales, whose trainers are on board, but it's also now being completed in South Australia, Tasmania, and Victoria. So those EOIs are currently being assessed, and hopefully we'll have those contract trainers on in the very, very near future. Planning for the other states is also underway. And then what the contract trainers do is they undergo a train the trainer program. So the next of these is scheduled for Melbourne in late June. And it's a 2-day, it's a really intense course with the idea that the expertise that's given to these trainers will stay within each of those jurisdictions once the program concludes. So your own beekeeping industries can take advantage of that really intense training that's been given. The trainers also run the training across each of the jurisdictions. So a typical program content is on the screen. The courses are a full day. They run from 8 to around 3:30. Typically, they come catered. So come along and get some free catering. And yeah, as you can see, there's a typical workshop program there on the screen. The content within the training courses has gone through a bit of a pilot process. It was piloted late last year. It's been refined through some of the earlier workshops in New South Wales, and it's now been reviewed by national experts. The feedback that they've provided is currently being used to update the content, which will then be used to ensure consistency in the technical messaging around the country. So we wanted to take it full advantage of all of the technical expertise that we've got across Australia for anyone that might have managed Varroa overseas or internationally before coming across here. As you know, in New South Wales, training has commenced. Thanks, Joe. Recently, we held training at the New South Wales Apiaries Association. It was great. There were some beekeepers, I'm told, from other states that came along. So South Australia particularly got a mention. So thank you. In New South Wales, there's 21 workshops left to be held, and we're proposing to release a schedule for them shortly. The location of these is based on the location of registered beekeepers. So when you register, we ask for your hive brand, and we use that so we can track who we've been able to reach and where you're located. And just a bit of a plug here, if you're an unregistered beekeeper, you're not helping your state get the appropriate amount of training, and you're not helping get services to your area. So go right ahead and register if you haven't, because it makes sure that we can allocate the appropriate resources to where our industries are. Thanks, Joe. And then as we've sort of been trying to push out, we're trying to get our message out around what the program has on offer as broadly as possible, including what resources that we have available. So we'll be at the Tasmanian Apiaries Association this week. I think there's some staff then heading up to Queensland in July. We do the weekly email update, and there's a QR code on the screen. So if you want to scan that, or otherwise we'll send a link in a follow-up email as well. Today we've shared information with bee clubs and associations, a bit of an information pack, and some stuff that they might be able to share across with their own beekeepers. We've also shared that information with jurisdictions. But if there's any other information that you think we could provide or that you need to know, reach out, because you won't be the only one with that question. We've got heaps of resources here that we've had to develop as part of the earlier response, and we're really keen to make sure that the information we're getting out is relevant to you and it's at hand when you need it. Thank you, Joe. And that's it. That's it from me. So thank you for listening, and I'll hand back over to Bianca.
Thanks, Tamara. Fabulous. We have got lots of work going on. It can't all be seen, but yes, there's certainly lots of people already benefiting from all of the different activities that are happening so far. I'll just hand directly over to Elizabeth Frost, Technical Specialist Bees, New South Wales Department of Primary Industries. Take it away, Liz.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you everyone for attending tonight. What I'll be speaking about today is integrated pest management. Basically, it's pest management using as many tools as we have available for the pest of concern, and that's Varroa destructor for us on the East Coast presently. I'll just acknowledge the team at New South Wales DPI that developed this training content initially. Kelly Lease, Education Officer, Honeybees Training Coordinator, Honeybees Mark Page, our graphic designer Jess Green, and the B team, broader B team here at New South Wales DPI. So what you'll be seeing today is a real snapshot, a condensed version of the Varroa mite management program training that we deliver in a one-day workshop. So this is a really distilled, punchy, all killer, no filler. Not that there's any filler in the one dayer that I hope you all attend at some stage in your state. So integrated pest management. This is based on the pyramid concept, just like our food pyramid. So we start at the bottom with kind of everyday things that we should be striving for most often. That's our cultural control methods, followed by mechanical controls, which can, where they exist, happen at the same time. And then thinking it like the food pyramid that we all know and love, these are our sometimes. Obviously, they're not foods, they're chemicals used in a food production setting, but those are our sometimes tools. So our cultural control tools, mechanical and chemical, all run through each one of those, starting with cultural controls. To set the scene, oops, I'm not showing it on the full screen, am I? There we go. Okay, that looks better to you guys. That's on the full screen now. So just on this food pyramid again, which the IPM pyramid has those same concepts. We start at the bottom with our cultural and mechanical tools for as long as those provide control of varroa below a damaging level. And then once a level is reached where there could be damage to our hive as a result of varroa, then we step in with our chemical controls, which are either synthetic or non-synthetic. And non-synthetic are also known as organic treatments. So key points right now for us to remember is that we're currently experiencing the spread of varroa across New South Wales. So those varroa populations are unstable. We might be seeing higher levels than we would expect to see once varroa is widely spread and stable across the environment. Reinfestation will be common potentially until that population stabilizes. And the higher the infestation, the greater the damage to the hive. So in our current environment, we can see from the heat map where there are known areas of high infestation through those dark purples. We can expect to have commonly reinfestation happen, which is why our monitoring is important. So this is a drone comb used to trap varroa in one of those high infestation zones near the Newcastle, in the Newcastle area. And this frame was uncapped just to illustrate that shortly after capping, when those foundress mites haven't had time to reproduce yet, this is I guess, exhibits a very high infestation level. What you're seeing here is only foundress mites. So none of those have reproduced yet. So that's indicative of quite high infestation in that environment. And then once you have high infestation, if it goes uncontrolled, you'll see really detrimental signs like mites on adult bees. Once you can visibly see those, just holding up a frame on the backs of bees, you've got an incredibly high infestation level. And at the brood level, you'll start seeing what some varroa development officers have seen in the field, evidence of parasitic mite syndrome, real spotty brood, sunken brood, lots of uncapped brood, and in some cases, like this photo from the Bee Informed Partnership's Rob Snyder, you might see actual varroa on these slumped down larvae. So back to our pyramid, we'll start with our cultural and mechanical methods. Those are our methods where we're preventing varroa reproduction through cultural controls, or we're implementing mechanical controls that kill varroa by physical means. So we'll start there. Obviously, those two methods don't use chemicals, so their toxicity is nil, which is great. So all these control tools are underpinned by monitoring. If we don't know we have varroa, we don't really know what we're doing in the control space, and we might be wasting money, time, labor, all these things that come into play when we have to manage a new pest. So you need to be able to know what you're looking for, how to look for it, and to look for it effectively. So with a national mite management program, we recommend assessing a minimum of 10 hives per apiary. And depending on how often you're doing it or what time of season, you kind of want to rotate which hives you're looking at as well. Don't just keep taking, 300 bees from the same old hives. Remember, we're in this period of varroa spread and establishment. where the Varroa population is not stable, and you might not see a really even infestation level across all your hives in a single apiary. So to be able to capture random spiking infestations in one hive versus another, it pays to sample different hives each time. And with this unstable population, it's a bare minimum to be sampling and monitoring your hives 4 times a year. That's the bare minimum. Even in established populations overseas where they've had Varroa for decades, 4 times a year monitoring is not enough if you want to keep on top of your numbers and be really agile and flexible and, ahead of that ever increasing mite population curve. Just briefly on our monitoring methods, if you aren't across these, you better get across them quick smart. So we've got alcohol washing, soapy water wash, and sugar shake. Those are our top recommended methods, and they're the best methods to assess whole hive mite infestation. So choose one, be consistent, and keep doing it. 4 times a year, bare minimum. So determining our mite load, all these resources, I should say, will be nationally available. The Varroa development officers will soon have workbooks that they're able to take to clubs with them. Through any of the face-to-face Varroa management workshops, you'll be able to take home a resource book that covers the topics in the full day workshop, including determining mite load. So I'm being pretty brief about it in this presentation because there's a lot of control methods I want to focus on, but all these tools will be available to you through the Varroa Mite Management Program. So determining mite load. What we have right now is overseas recommendations as our best advice for Australia currently. Of course, this will change over time, but we need data to inform that decision. And globally, where there are thresholds recommended, it's understood that there'll be regional variation. And that variation happens once the spread is stable and the population is established. And we've got scientists, extension specialists working with commercial beekeepers and research hives to assess what that threshold over time will actually be for Australia. But this is our best threshold level at the moment. So before you reach threshold, there are tools that you can think about implementing before you even get Varroa, which is what we'll run through today. Our cultural methods are requeening with resistant or tolerant stock, splitting hives to break the brood cycle. When you break the brood cycle, you break Varroa reproduction cycle as well, and brood interruption techniques. With our breeding tool here, cultural control, we've got these 2 trait groups, we can call them Varroa tolerance and Varroa resistance. And there are different behavioral techniques, or traits rather, that those stocks employ. I should say that this is a medium to long-term solution for the Australian industry. Behavioral traits conferring resistance to a pest or disease are really lowly heritable. That means they're quite difficult to select for and they're difficult to maintain. So selection pressure on these traits needs to be maintained every season, forever, until you retire out of beekeeping, essentially. And you have to have Varroa to select for these traits. So the pest has to be present for you to see how hives exhibit resistance or tolerance to that pest. So there's currently no recognized tolerant or resistant stock in Australia. However, there is an importation protocol in place through the Commonwealth, and any stock that is permitted to enter legally has to go through Australia's quarantine facility in Victoria. But we do have Varroa in Australia now, so New South Wales beekeepers can start selecting for those traits once they have Varroa. I'll just touch on the top 4 that through Plan B, the Resilient Beekeeping Project through AgriFutures, researchers have deemed the most likely traits to be selected for within Australia. So breeding hygienic behaviors, including Varroa-sensitive hygiene, mite removal behaviors, removal of Varroa-infested larvae from brood cells, so the bees are able to sense the presence of Varroa under capped brood, uncap those cells, disrupting Varroa reproduction, And they may also choose to remove those varroa-infested larvae or pupae from the cells. Again, breeding is a medium to long-term goal. It won't happen overnight, but we've got a great diversity of stock within Australia as a really diverse starting population. Another cultural control is splitting, requeening, brood interruption. So remember, varroa reproduces in the brood, right? So any splitting, swarm control that involves queenlessness or splitting hives, requeening, that break in the brood cycle also breaks the varroa reproductive cycle. So if there's a requeening opportunity with tolerant or resistant genetics, obviously that would be the ideal. But we can also use our existing genetics, which may not have that tolerance or resistant trait expressing to the level of selected stock. Requeening and brood interruption obviously involves removing or caging the queen, killing the queen. And there's lots of different ways to do splitting, brood interruption. Ask a beekeeper, they'll tell you their preferred way, and it won't be the same as the next 6. So some of the methods that we describe in the training courses are the double brood box method, walkaway splits, nucleus hive splits. Northern tablelands boys love their damaries. So keep in mind, what we're focusing on is a control method that disrupts varroa reproduction. So anytime you have broodlessness, whether you're making that artificially through splitting and brood interruption or environmentally going to a cold climate, that will disrupt varroa's upward population trend. Again, you can do this artificially through queen caging. There's many, many different ways to practice this. It's a bit tricky. You need to make sure you're cutting down queen cells. It's more of a tool that I suppose sideliner and recreational beekeepers will have access to, but large-scale commercial beekeepers do have periods of queenlessness, splitting for swarm control, making nukes, different ways they manage their business that disrupts the brood cycle. Remember, that can also be a tool to disrupt the varroa cycle. And last but not least, in our cultural controls, don't underestimate the environmental brood break. Talking to a lot of beekeepers at the New South Wales conference last week, and some of our Western friends have a brood break in the summer. So if you have a brood break in the summer and you're not producing honey at that time, that might be an optional time, an optimal time to consider a treatment if your mite levels are at threshold. Obviously, cold can also stimulate a brood break in some areas of Australia, and that'll potentially be a critical time to think about treatment to control varroa. So just recapping on that brood break, again, when there's no brood, all the varroa is on the adult bees, so it's much easier to target 100% of the varroa in that colony versus when there's cap brood. Some of those varroa will they'll be hidden, I suppose, hidden from treatment exposure, which could damage or kill them. Talking a mile a minute to get through this stuff, so hopefully you guys are keeping up. I'm sure you are. This is recorded, and we'll have contract trainers and agency trainers in your state delivering a full day on these topics as well. So mechanical controls. The 2 that we're talking about through the varroa management program are the most readily adoptable, and as far as drone brood trapping, the most effective. So we've got screen bottom boards and drone brood trapping to touch on, and mechanical control methods are killing varroa by physical means. So with screen bottom boards, obviously you have a ventilated bottom board with some type of a mesh underneath, so hive debris, varroa fall through that. This method is it's an incremental, a tiny help to a varroa control. It's not a standalone method. So the varroa can be groomed off bees, fall off bees, small percentage falls off naturally. Excuse me. And they'll fall to the ground or get stuck on a sticky mat, for example. not an accurate monitoring tool. So just remember to go focus back on your alcohol wash, soapy water wash, and sugar shake methods for monitoring your whole hive infestation level. But screen bottom boards will allow some Varroa to fall through and not get back up. With your drone trapping, Varroa mites evolved with Apis cerana, and that balance was struck because the Varroa mite only reproduce in drone brood in Apis cerana. That's the Asian honeybee. In European honeybee that we manage, Apis mellifera, they can reproduce in both drone brood and worker brood, but they absolutely prefer to reproduce in drone brood. So when there is drone brood present, they'll make a beeline for that drone brood. And we can use that to our advantage and put a drone brood frame in, either a full frame, split frame, short frame where they'll fill the bottom in with drone brood, and then you can just slice it off and dispose of it. So this is a method where once the queen lays that out, you want to make sure you pull that frame out no later than 20 days from egg laying. That's just a early point for us to recommend so beekeepers don't get caught out and have that frame start hatching, because then you'll have a exponential increase in your drone population, which you don't want. So our cautionary notes for drone brood trapping, obviously it's only effective when the colony is raising drones. Some younger queens don't lay that many unfertilized drone eggs. Some older queens lay more. There'll be some bad seasons when there's not many drones produced at all. So in those cases, it might not be that reliable of a tool for you. And you have to keep good records. It's hard to scale this option. So recreational sideline beekeepers, any beekeeper with fewer hives, this is quite an efficient option if the season's right. In the Newcastle zone, I use drone trapping to control my mite levels to an average of 5.5 mites in a wash over mid-spring through early autumn and produce 10 ideal honey supers. So it's definitely doable at a small scale, but you really need to keep track of your timing. When you put the drone frame in, when you first saw eggs, so that you're not caught out and that drone frame starts emerging. Because with drones, the development period under the cap brood is longer, so that's a longer time for more Varroa reproduction. So more Varroa can reproduce in drone brood than in worker brood. Now, the chemical mite control methods, those will be critical methods in the current phase of Varroa spread and establishment that we're in. So cultural and mechanical methods, what we really have the greatest tools in those the baseline tools. Cultural is brood break splitting, causing an interruption in the brood that causes an interruption in the Varroa reproduction until, of course, we have some Varroa resistance and tolerance stock available to us. And then that will be an additional tool. And mechanical, really drone brood trapping is the most effective and efficient. All these methods you can read about on our New South Wales DPI website as well. And so mechanical mite control methods, the top of our pyramid here, this top of the pyramid signifies utilize as little as possible, but as much as necessary. So this is a tool to use only when your Varroa threshold is reached and you need to intervene with some type of a chemical control, either synthetic or non-synthetic. So we've got the chemicals on this page are the only ones that are currently permitted for use in Australia. We've got 4 synthetic options and we've got 2 non-synthetic options. Our active ingredients are on the left. In the middle, you've got your registered trade name, the type on the far right. This control table has been on the DPI website since mid last year. So what I've circled here is, importantly, we've got our 2 synthetics at the top, Apivar and Apitraz. those both have the active ingredient amitraz. And what that means is you should not use those two products back to back, because what we want to do with any pest is rotate treatments that have different modes of action, modes of killing that pest, so the pest doesn't develop resistance against those. Also, we've got two synthetic pyrethroids, Apistan and Baverol. Those are also the same mode of action to kill Varroa. So with our chemicals here, we've got 6 options, which is a great starting point. And we have a few rotation options here, which we'll run through more thoroughly. So key messages with any miticide, the goal is to kill mites, right? And where are the mites? They're in the brood nest, they're on bees. So with all 6 miticides we currently have registered, they need to be placed according to their permit or label within the hive. And those instructions will spell out where in the brood nest those products should be placed. They're all either placed within or directly on top of the brood nest, never in the honey supers. So we talked about our mode of action. That's the method that chemical applies to kill the mite, and how we can't use chemicals with the same mode of action back to back. That reason is so the Varroa doesn't constantly receive exposure to the same chemical. That can lead to Varroa developing resistance to that chemical. And in the long term, or maybe short term, we could shoot ourselves in the foot and lose a chemical if it builds up resistance because we've misused it. Obviously, don't use more than one chemical at the same time. These chemicals are tested for their use in the hive, and we want to reduce chemical use so that we reduce the risk of residues in our hive, reduce cost to our operations. These chemicals are not cheap, so we want to use them effectively and only when necessary. Following the label instructions is the law, and if there isn't an Australian label ready yet, then we would use the Australian, the permit through the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority. So with our chemical instructions, this is a big topic for us all. So I want people to feel free to come back to DPI's website to read about permits, labels, and safety data sheets. Our education officer, Kelly Lees, has written a couple of brief fact sheets specifically for beekeepers to help you understand permits, labels, and safety data sheets. And these are all things that professional beekeepers running a business need to get across. And you need to be able to have the chemical miticide permits and safety data sheets in your chemical record book that all staff should be across that are operating and using these chemicals. They'll all have unique storage and handling, potentially different quantities applied to different hives, nukes, production hives, durations of treatment, and different requirements for chemical handling. Some will be more dangerous than others. Obviously, none of these should be handled with bare hands. And they'll have their own disposal instructions as well. So synthetic chemicals, we've got our Apivar and Apitraz, same mode of action, so we can't use those back to back. Those two cannot be used on a honey flow. And we've got our synthetic pyrethroids. Apistan can't be used on a honey flow. Baverol can be used on honey flow in Australia. I'll try and run through these quickly. Baverol and Apistan, obviously same mode of action, so can't use these back to back. They're hanging strips. And yes, Apistan don't use with Suprazon. We can't sell comb honey if Apistan has been used in that box of comb. They're strips, so synthetic strips, easy to rip apart. You need to use chemical resistant gloves, and they're different dosage depending on the size of the hive. With Baverol, this can be used with Suprazon, honey Suprazon. So with this one, look to the Australian permit. There's currently not Australian labeled product. So if you look at product labels from overseas, it will say can't be used with honey Suprazon, but the permit in Australia allows for its use with honey Suprazon. another strip to be suspended in the brood nest of the hive. And with these products that hang as a strip in the brood nest, you want to make sure they're hanging between two frames with brood on them so that there's nurse bees passing against those strips. There's emerging young worker bees and drones passing along those strips, and Varroa can come into direct contact with them. Apitraz and Apivar, same mode of action, so you need to rotate either Baverol, Apistan, formic acid, or Apigard in between these two. So with Apivar, it can't be used on the honey flow. It has a lot of contamination risks. So we want to make sure we reserve this for when we have a period of the season where we're not producing honey. And that is the same with our Apitraz. Apitraz, you can see this one, you wouldn't want leather gloves. You want to put on some chemical resistant gloves for these bad boys. So moving on to our two non-synthetic chemicals that we have currently legal for use in Australia, we've got Formic Pro, which is a formic acid product, and Apigard, which is a thymol essential oil product. These two have different modes of action, so these are great tools potentially to rotate amongst your synthetics, depending on what's happening in your bee season. With Formic Pro, it's got some temperature restrictions that you really need to pay attention to. Can't be used over 29.5 Celsius, so you'll really have to choose your season carefully. And the type of hive you have really matters with this one. It needs to be a solid bottom board with a fully open entrance. If you don't have a fully open entrance, you'll need to provide some other source of ventilation. So make sure you read the product label very carefully on this one. Comes in two wicking pads, and just to get across the product website for this one and label to make sure you're adhering to all the requirements to prevent having adverse reactions in your hive at higher temperatures. With Apigard, this one also has temperature restrictions. It's not very effective under 15 Celsius. So additionally, it should not be used while you've got honey supers on, because it could taint the honey and contaminate honeycomb or wax. Comes in little trays or a bulk tub that you can scoop out or syringe out different appropriate quantities. I'll wrap it up there and pass it back over to Danny. Essentially, all miticide options, I'd recommend that you visit ABIC's website, Australian Honeybee Industry Council's website. They've got a chemical treatment table that they keep up to date and has those key points for beekeepers of any scale in terms of temperature restrictions, restrictions to use on a honey flow or not, contamination risk storage recommendations, and the permit numbers. Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liz. That's awesome. I'll just quickly shift over to Danny. I'll get Joe to chuck on Danny's presentation for us now.
Thanks, Bianca. I too are very ordinary at jokes, so I won't even attempt to do over there. So as Bianca said, I'm Danny Lefebvre. I work for the Australian Honeybee Industry Council, along with Bianca. Let me just make sure this is all going to work. There we go. So tonight I'm going to cover off on the Australian Agricultural and Veterinary Chemical Registration process as it applies to miticides and our situation in the honeybee industry. I'll also talk about the differences between permits and registrations and who can register products. I'll talk to what miticides are currently available and also what we're aware of that's in the pipeline. But first, I want to address the elephant in the room. I want to talk about oxalic acid. We're aware that this is a hot topic in the industry at the moment and a critical option that is missing from the approved miticide list. But there is an application with the APVMA for a use permit for oxalic acid, that being apibioxyl, which has been with the APVMA for about 5 months now. So we're expecting an outcome for this assessment really soon. Hopefully tonight's presentation will give you a bit more background to the process in getting products registered, and you'll understand why it is really a slow process. So the Australian Pesticide Veterinarian and Medicine Authority, or the APVMA, is the regulator for all agricultural and veterinarian chemicals, or for short AgVet chemicals in Australia. They are the statutory government authority. Their purpose is to regulate the agricultural and veterinary chemicals to manage the risk of pests and diseases for Australian community and to protect Australia's trade and the health of safety of people, animals and the environment. For an AgVet chemical product to legally be manufactured, imported, sold, supplied, sold or used in Australia, it must be registered by the APVMA. The registration process involves scientifically evaluating the safety and efficacy of the product to ensure it meets the high expectations of protecting Australia's agriculture, trade and its people. The APVMA deals with thousands of applications annually from across the whole of agriculture, but for the purposes of this discussion tonight, I'm just going to focus on the relevant bits to the honeybee industry. The APVMA can register active constituents or active ingredients. They can register or approve products and the product labels, which describe the allowable use patterns for that product. They also manage and register the MRLs for that active ingredient. Now, MRLs are the maximum residue limit, or the maximum amount of chemical residue that is allowed to be found in honey. To determine the MRL, the APVMA looks at many sources of information, including what MRLs are set globally, the human safety data, and the use pattern of that chemical. For many of our Varroa products, the MRL is set to the minimum detectable limit, or the lowest point that lab instruments can pick up residues. The APVMA have a couple of processes available, including being full registration and emergency use permits, which have been used during this response to ensure beekeepers have access to treatments. The full registration is what we ultimately want to end up with our products, but emergency use permits provide a short-term solution, which is what we are currently operating under all of our available treatments. Emergency use permits are a short-term solution and being used to allow the sale and use of Varroa control products, whilst many of those products are going through the full registration process. As we transitioned away from eradication and management, the only readily available miticides were from New Zealand. Emergency use permits have been approved to allow beekeepers to use that New Zealand labelled products for mite control here in Australia for the short term. It's important to know that currently only beekeepers in New South Wales and the ACT are allowed to use miticides under those permits. As mites are discovered in other states, the permits will be expanded to cover all beekeepers in those states, and this can happen pretty quickly. As Australian registrations come through and Australian labelled products are readily available, then the permits will drop away for those products. But whilst beekeepers are using New Zealand label products, they must adhere to the permit conditions first, and if silent, then refer to the label conditions. This is important as some of the permit conditions are different to what's on the label. This is because the APVMA has assessed additional data, or the use pattern in Australia is different to that in New Zealand. So the decision tree for when you're using the New Zealand label products is to read the permit first and then the label. There are multiple permits currently active, but the permits listed in the table here are active for those particular products. The permits describe how the product can be used and what protective equipment should be used when handling them. And again, if it's not described in the permit, then you must look at the label on the product. At the bottom of each of the permits is a list of approved suppliers that are allowed to sell the product under the permit. If you're a supplier and listening into this and you're not on those lists and you want to be on the list, then email us at ARBIC and we'll put you in touch with the right people to get you on the list. I'm not going to hang around this slide for very long because we do have those permit numbers listed on our miticide table, or you can just simply search the APVMA website to find those relevant permits. So let's talk about the process that Varroa mite treatments need to go through to get registered. This is not to say this is the only process, but it is the process that nearly all treatments need to go through. And it all starts with the manufacturer. They need to be motivated to lodge an application to register their product with the APVMA. And I say motivated. We have approached many manufacturers globally to encourage them to register their products in Australia. And nearly every conversation we have starts with, well, what is the market potential in Australia? And what is the potential return on my investment considering the cost and time that it takes to register my product? I can tell you what, we've got this narrative down pat now. We provide them with the industry statistics and talk to them about the potential spread of varroa and what the market potential will look like in Australia over time. And sometimes this works, but other times it's not convincing enough or maybe not attractive enough compared to the US and European markets to convince them to invest in our market. But we're not the only ones talking to manufacturers. We know the New South Wales DPI have also been reaching out to manufacturers to encourage them to register. And I know of many resellers that have also been negotiating with manufacturers to get their products registered in Australia so that they can provide options for our beekeepers. So in this process, ARBIC cannot register products. Individuals in an industry cannot register products unless they are formally acting as authorised agents for the manufacturer, which comes with a significant amount of responsibilities when doing that. So once we have the manufacturer interested, they gather all the data together and lodge an application for preliminary assessment, which once assessed provides details on the pathway and the registration, including the cost and timeframes. Once past the first drafting gate with the APVMA then moves on to start evaluating in detail the data provided. This includes efficacy data, bee safety data, honey residue data, human health, environmental impact, and label conditions. This process is thorough and it takes a long time. At any point in the evaluation, the APVMA may request more information or clarification from the manufacturer, and this can further delay the process. I've indicated on the slide there where the current products are up to in the process, with Baverol and Apibioxol sitting in the evaluation stage, and Apivar and Apigard completed those processes and now fully registered. And as you can see at the bottom of the flowchart there, this process eventually leads to one of three outcomes, and we're hoping they all lead to approvals. So why does it matter if your product that you're using is registered or not? It's a question we often get. So the APVMA approval process gives us confidence to be able to say that if you are using the registered approved product and using that product as directed on the label, you can be confident that residues, human safety, and bee safety are not an issue unless otherwise stated, particularly honey residues. If you stick to the instructions, residues will not be an issue. The rigour that the APVMA applies to the data provided and the many decades of miticide use around the globe provides us with that confidence. Unregistered products have not had the same level of scrutiny. They don't have to meet any standards when manufacturing. Even if they are the same active ingredient, they can behave differently. All registered ag chemicals in Australia have to be produced in facilities that follow good manufacturing practice, or GMP. This is important, as GMP ensures that the products produced are consistent and that they have active ingredients that are pure. This gives you confidence that you won't get a dodgy batch that knocks over your bees or contaminates your honey. There may be cheaper alternatives available, but there is no protection when using these products. No reassurances about residues, bee safety, or batch consistency. And in using cheaper, unregistered products, you are taking a risk with your bees, with your products, and potentially with your health, and notwithstanding that it is illegal. So let's talk about the miticide products that are available. Liz has already covered a lot of them, but we'll talk about where they're up to with registrations. We've made this table at ARBIC, and we have it on our website. It has the currently registered products, the products that are under permit, and some of the products that are in the pipeline. We're continually updating this table with new information as it comes to hand. There's a QR code in the middle of the screen that will take you to the website. But if you're downloading the table off the website, make sure that you do keep coming back to the website to check, because we are updating it regularly. This table only contains the information that we're aware of, though. There are many products in the registration process, and ones that we know about and have permission from the manufacturer to talk about are on the table. There are many more that we know about, but due to the commercial in confidence, the manufacturer doesn't want us to talk publicly about them, as they want to be the first to market. Then there would also be ones that are big that we don't know about. We don't have any visibility over the APVMA process or what applications are submitted. So the information in the table is either from approved permits or direct conversations with manufacturers, but it provides a guide in one spot. So I'm just going to walk through this table and provide, and starting with some of the available products. So the only two, as Liz said, available products are registered products that currently have full registration are Apivar and Apigard, a synthetic option and organic option. However, there is no Australian labelled Apivar in the country, so we have to use the New Zealand labelled product. To allow this, even though it is a product that has full registration, it also has an emergency use permit to allow the New Zealand product to be used. And it's our understanding that there is Australian labelled Apigard available in the country, in which case, if beekeepers are using the Australian labelled Apigard, they should follow the label, as the permit doesn't apply. We have listed each of the use permits on the table under the product name, so you can simply search the APVMA website using those permit numbers to get the current permit for that product. Or we have summarised the permit conditions on the table, and we regularly check to ensure that they are accurate. And don't worry, we get plenty of feedback on the table which makes sure that it is accurate. The next lot are products that are not registered and are being made available under emergency use permits. So we know, for example, Baverol has been submitted for full registration late last year. And we have had conversations with the manufacturers of Formic Pro and understand that they will register their products, but not aware of where their progress is at as yet. So all insecticides have a specific mode of action or a pathway that the chemical acts on within the mites. If you use chemicals with the same mode of action multiple times in a row, then you will risk those mites developing resistance or developing ways of blocking those pathways that the insecticide uses to kill the mites. We have color-coded the table to indicate that those products with the same mode of action, if the color is the same, then these products should not be used back to back, but rotated with other chemicals of a different color. This will ensure that we don't build resistance to specific chemicals and then lose them from our toolbox. This is what's happened globally, with Baverol becoming ineffective in many countries because in the early days of Varroa in their countries, beekeepers continually used the same product. Even though it might not feel like it, we're in a much better position to prevent resistance than any of those countries had when they started. We have a good understanding of IPM, as you just heard, and we have more treatments available than any of those countries had in their early days of Varroa. The last two columns are two products that we know are in the pipeline and we're able to talk about in detail. Oxalic acid, as I said earlier, has a permit application submitted, and we hope to hear about the outcome soon. Another exciting product in the pipeline is a Loon Cap. This is a slow-release oxalic acid strip that, when registered, will provide an important organic option for beekeepers for managing mites over time. We often hear that there's not enough options available for Varroa treatments. When we look at the table and the current chemistry listed in there, all the major chemical active ingredients are there. There is no other additional chemistry of significance available globally. The missing products from the list, apart from oxalic acid, are variations of the same chemistry. So there is no magic bullet that we are missing, and that is why Varroa's mites are so difficult to deal with, and that there isn't many treatment options available globally. And that's why it is so important to follow IPM in keeping those mite numbers low to start with, and only using miticide strips as a backstop or a last resort. But there are some promising products coming through on the horizon that we know about. So some of the other products that are in the pipeline but we can't talk specifically about in detail, are things like additional oxalic acid stripped brands and additional products that are blends of existing organic chemistry, like a blend of formic and oxalic on a slow release strip. And there's some companies with alternate delivery mechanisms for some of the existing chemistry. There's botanical extracts that looks really promising, and some new technology in dsRNA, and a raft of early stage products that are in development. Whilst none of these are in the registration process, we are working with them to get them towards the registration. So what is ARBIC doing in this space? I think from this presentation tonight, you can see that we are actively trying to get as many options for beekeepers as possible. But in the process, it is a process, and a slow process at that. We continue to lobby the APVMA to expedite the application process. We continue to facilitate discussions with manufacturers. We are actively connecting manufacturers with local researchers to help them get the data they need to register their products. And we've even been successful in getting some funding to assist some manufacturers with the cost of the registrations. We will continue to do, slide just a bit. We'll continue to work with the few resources we have and get as many options available for beekeepers as possible. And of course, for those non-beekeepers, but I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir, the best way that you can support beekeepers is to buy 100% Australian honey. And as always, if you feel ARBIC's doing a reasonable job for you, please support us through the Friends of ARBIC, which you can scan the QR code there. The more friends of ARBIC we have, the more resources we can commit to registering or getting more products on the market and getting them available for beekeepers. And that's it from me.
Lovely. Thanks, Danny. So it's nearly 8:10. So we said we go till 8:30. So I've got quite a few number of questions here. I think we'll just change it up to get a change of voice. So I might put my first question forward to Elizabeth. Now, this is going to be around some sort of monitoring queries that came back from the crowd. We have actually answered over 41 questions throughout this evening. So to get a couple of these out across the airwaves and in the recording for the people that view them later on, I think that's going to be a really fantastic bit of information later. So Liz, the first kind of queries we've got that I think would be really good for you to help us to answer is the treatment and monitoring side of things. So when people find maybe 1 or 2 Varroa in an alcohol wash, how long are we recommending that they do a second test on that hive or in that apiary?
So it really depends. Yeah, I guess if you have a populous colony in the summer, I would be checking a 1 or 2 in. You could check it in another week if you had the time. If you were a recreational beekeeper and your hive is in the backyard, you could check it the following week or the 2 weeks after that. If you're a commercial beekeeper, you might wait a bit longer. But essentially, I'd recommend checking monthly during the peak season, spring, summer, autumn. With the honey flow period, the threshold is a little bit higher. So we've got kind of a watch and wait during summer honey flow periods. And we recommend waiting to control with a chemical until you find more than 9 mites. And I found that was a sweet spot. Just obviously sample size of 1 is nothing, but Australia, you've got to start somewhere. And in the Newcastle zone, maintaining a 5.5 mite per alcohol wash allowed that hive to produce 10 ideals of honey. And then at the end of the season, that was a 10. And so treatment was recommended. But yeah, essentially you've got bare minimum monitor 4 times, but you really want to know when you reach that threshold. So even if you're in New South Wales area that isn't close to a purple zone on the heat map, I'd recommend checking monthly. If you're only checking 10 hives per apiary and kind of rotating those around, that won't be impacting your bee population overly much if they're already quite healthy.
Yep. Cool. No, and I think it's challenging over the winter time, but we do need to maybe pick some days if we've already got mites, and we're worried about them reaching a threshold over that time, picking the best days possible. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit different across the different seasonal conditions, I suppose, too. Another query that's come in regarding monitoring is from a hobbyist with 5 hives. To give you a bit of background on that particular query, is some hives that are very weak that they're looking after. So would they be better off to just do those Varroa tests and monitoring and alcohol washes on 1 or 2 of the strongest hives? Or would you suggest that they do all of them? They're worried that alcohol washing 300 bees on a weak hive would push them and weaken them even more.
Yeah, so we've got 5 hives, some weak ones, some strong ones. In that instance, yeah, there's a choice here for beekeepers now. We don't have a control order, so will you, if you find one hive that is at threshold, treatment threshold, will you treat just the one or everybody? If you have weak hives in the mix that you can't do an alcohol wash on because the population's too weak, in that instance, in my professional opinion, I'd recommend treating everything. So you just, yeah, deal with what you have there. Obviously, you ideally want to get your hives at somewhat of an equal population. That's the goal and the dream for us all. But if we do have some weak ones that can't spare 300 bees, yeah, you might try a sugar shake. You'll kill less bees. It's more of a sweet, yeah, sweet torture than alcohol wash. You'll kill them all right away. But sugar shake, we've been finding that it is not non-lethal, but you might consider a sugar shake for those weak ones potentially. They could be loaded with mites, so it's just about thinking, do I want to fully assess my risk at this apiary site or just go for the strong ones? Those weak ones could have lots of mites as well, so it's a personal decision, that one.
Yeah, yeah. While we're talking about loaded with mites that you mentioned, what's being done about control of Varroa in feral or wild bee colonies?
Yeah, I suppose within the eradication component of the response, obviously there was fipronil baiting, but we really don't have control over the feral population. What I guess what we can control as beekeepers about that feral population is to not contribute to that further. So the feral population obviously started with, when bees were first brought into Australia, various management methods were used to prevent swarming. So we can be part of the solution ongoing. Obviously, the feral hives that are, meters and meters up in a gum tree, we're not going to be treating those ones. And we're not killing those anymore either. We're in management. So I suppose what we're looking at now is this unstable period where the feral hives will crash from high infestation. There's not much we can do about it except for not contribute to that population further by controlling our own swarming.
Yeah, yeah, great advice. So I could ask you another one, if that's all right. Coordination of treatments by beekeepers. Is the department looking at finding ways that beekeepers can be treating by location and their date, so that they can be coordinated and rotated across Australia? It's a tricky one. I feel like I know the answer, but it's a difficult one, and one that seems logical,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
not necessarily.
I suppose it will be the DPI's place to recommend treatments depending on seasonal conditions. What we've got is 6 treatment options legally available to us and a range of environmental conditions, which make some of those possible to use at some times of the season and not others. We've got beekeepers that have nectar flows almost all year if they wanted to burn the diesel. We've got others that have broodless periods. So there really isn't a one size fits all model. So DPI won't, I suppose, dictate a specific treatment regime because every operation is different as well. We've got organic producers, conventional producers, but what I guess there's a light at the end of the tunnel out of Varroa for me. I've been hearing about so much beekeeper collaboration and that beekeepers haven't been, they've never talked to each other so much about Varroa and, they're getting their heads together and talking about what's working, what's not working. So I think there will be some grassroots level in specific environmental conditions where beekeepers do similar things, and they'll work that out over time, what kind of treatments to rotate, and hopefully talk to each other like they've never talked before, because it's handy when you kind of have some flight path overlap to
Yeah.
ensure you're both keeping your varroa at similar levels and not just reinfesting each other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Awesome. Yep, I'm hearing that too. It's a bit neat. When we're talking about treatments in different parts of Australia and this conversation to each other around what we're doing, could you just give us a bit of an idea? And Danny, you might be able to weigh in on this question around the stress beekeepers have, that there's some places where we've got supers on all year, even sometimes harvesting honey over the winter period. What treatments can we use in those consistently warmer parts of the country, like Queensland, for example, in the northern parts of New South Wales, and obviously some of the warmer areas in WA eventually, if we do end up having varroa in that sort of part of the country? What advice do you have around about that?
So yeah, I'll jump in first, I suppose. Where beekeepers are, most of their cash receipts are honey, and they're producing honey majority of the year. You have to think, what are my temperature? Like, you could use obviously Formic Pro, or you could use Baverol. Baverol has no temperature restrictions. Formic Pro has some pretty extreme temperature restrictions if you're in the tropics. So 29 and a half Celsius. That's pretty cold to a Queenslander. So you'll really have to think hard about, do I ever have a period that is low for honey? In which case you've got a lot more treatment options. If you're always producing honey, truly always producing honey, and you can never take supers off, then obviously you'll only have Baverol and Formic Pro to play with as a control tool. You can also use broodless periods or forced brood breaks if you're doing aggressive splitting and queenless periods. That could be a cultural control tool that tropical-based beekeepers could use.
Yep, yep. And someone's asked if we can please explain the DeMarie method in more detail. I don't know if we have all the time to do that, but I just wanted to put that to you, Liz.
Yeah, I saw that in the comment from Shelby, and I'm thinking about an article of that one. It's essentially, splitting method, where one hive sits atop the other. I'll have to, yeah, if Shelby could put his contact details, we'll probably address that one offline.
Yeah, awesome. No, we could talk all night about all of the other IPM strategies in that sort of category. So I appreciate that. I knew I was putting a bit of heat on you when I threw that one over to you. Danny, I wanted to pass over to you for a few queries that have come in. Some of those are around the treatments on the horizon and those potentials that you mentioned in part of your presentation. We had a question about thermal treatments that came into the chat. Could you speak about potential future options for heat treatments?
Yeah, it's a tough one, Bianca. Yeah, look, heat treatments, we know they're going to be require a lot of power, right? So they're only going to be really useful for the smaller beekeepers that are able to get the power source to the hives. There are some systems that allow for it, but it's really going to be difficult on a large scale. We know that it can work. In fact, there's some really cool technology, Beewise, which is a fully automated beehive that actually uses heat treating to keep their varroa mites in check with their automated robots. But there's a number of different products in the market, and I have had some conversations with different beekeepers. And I see in our chat that some of our VDOs and BBOs are also playing with some of those heat treatment options. And they might be suitable for smaller beekeepers in the future, but they're already available in the market. So, and I know there's some information from the US about how effective they are. So, yeah, get out there and have a look and try. I think the key to trying different treatments is just make sure you don't do it on every single hive you've got. Do something that's tried, true, and tested on the majority of your hives, and play with novel treatments on a small number of hives to compare it.
Yeah, cool. A quick off the cuff question that I'm reading right now is it going to be possible or feasible for large scale beekeepers to operate without using synthetic treatments? that was really to the whole panel, but thought that
Yeah,
was an interesting one.
I'll have a crack first, and maybe Liz can chime in. But yeah, look, I think IPM is going to be the absolute key to this. We're in a much better position than any other country's been in because we're much further advanced in our understanding of IPM than any of those other countries were when they had their incursions. So I think the key is just throwing everything you've got at the toolbox at this, all your cultural, mechanical, and environmental control methods to try and keep your mite populations down and really just keep your organic treatments and your synthetic treatments for when it does truly get above thresholds. And in some scenarios, perhaps not in the early days, but once we get past that crazy period of reinfestation, we do see beekeepers who are able to do that. Really focus on those one percenters in the IPM methodology, and then just use those chemicals when you really have to, and that's the key. Will we be able to survive forever without it? I don't think so. We're going to have to treat at some stage because at some point those mites, they probably will get above threshold limits and you need to bring them back in check.
Did you want to add some there, Liz?
Yeah, I suppose in the New Zealand example, when Varroa spread and established, there was a lot of beekeepers that tried to go organic from the start, and they found that the formulations they had at the time, and there's so many variables, but a lot of beekeepers did get caught out in that spread establishment. Remember, you have these potential common reinfestation, this unstable population. So if you're not doing that continual monitoring, you might get caught out with a treatment that is a flash treatment. Some of the organics, they're not in the hive for a long time versus the synthetics that are in for 6 to 8, sometimes 10 weeks. And that covers, a lot of brood emerging. So you could get caught out if you're using treatments that have a shorter release period, which the organics do. But that said, in populations that are established, there's large scale beekeepers that I know of in the States that use Formic Pro and they're not using synthetics or oxalic and formic blend of the two, not a blend, sorry, a rotation of the two, where it's legal in North America. So there's success stories in established populations with just using organic non-synthetics.
Yeah, good to know. Haven't met many over there, but yeah, I heard about New Zealand having quite a few left doing organic treatments. I wanted to cross over, speaking about organics and chemical use, leads us all to questions about residues and testing. Danny, I thought you might be best to answer some of these queries around testing for residues. We don't have a market in Australia for that testing. There's no sort of availability in Australia to do that in the labs that we've got. Do we have some info about residues and the testing pathways? There's some information in the training that's being delivered nationally, but did you want to add any comment about the opportunities for beekeepers to do their own residue testing, or as you mentioned in your slides, just to reiterate, if we're using chemicals correctly to labels, what that means for beekeepers and residues?
Yeah, sure. Another great question. Thanks, Bianca. Yeah, look, there are availabilities. So Intertech's one of those in Australia that have offices in Australia. You can send your samples to their office in Australia. It does then go to Germany for their testing to their main lab and come back. But effectively, from a beekeeper's perspective, it's a domestic shipment, so it's quite easy. There are a couple in New Zealand that are able to do that testing, as well as others around the world. But yeah, you're right. The facilities in Australia at the moment are not extensive, and that's because we haven't had Varroa. We haven't had to test. The labs haven't had that demand. So as that demand grows and beekeepers want more testing, undoubtedly we will see more labs build that capability to do that testing. Now, it's not cheap and it's never going to be cheap to do residue testing, but beekeepers need to be reassured that if they are using registered products and they're following the label, the risk of residues in honey is not there unless they're doing something wrong or not following the label. There's a reason the APVMA goes through such a extensive registration processes to gain that confidence. And we also know the legal responsibilities is with MRLs. There's some 25 different MRLs for honey, and it is a legal responsibility already for packers or whoever is packing that honey for sale to ensure that honey is under the MRLs for all of those MRLs. So having these varroa treatments in the hives is no different. It's another set of MRLs that we need to ensure the honey is under before going to retail sale. And that's why we have quality assurance programs, right? So you have a quality assurance program in place when you're packing honey to make sure that you are ticking off on all those boxes.
Yep, love it. Thank you for the reassurance. So we've got a couple more queries that I'm going to put over to Tamara Prentice. If you've got some queries came in around just the extra information, a couple of queries about the training info, and I wanted to be able to, I guess, get your overview on a couple of queries. So the first one is around plans for weekend workshops for hobby beekeepers. That's been a repeat sort of question in the last few weeks that I've had, and a number of the team have already had. And you did mention resources available for beekeepers, so I wanted to be able to share some details about that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So the weekend workshops, we're probably at this stage not offering formal workshops on the weekend, the full day courses. Though if we get significant demand, we could. What we do have, though, are the videos that I mentioned. So the Varroa development officers can go out and talk to any bee club or association. They're commonly doing that on weekends because we know that's when most of the bee clubs are meeting. I'm going along to join one in Grafton next weekend, which I think's grown fairly significantly just because there was a couple of people wanted a video to come along, and that's just expanded through a Facebook invite. So certainly if you're getting a group of beekeepers together and you want a video to come along, get in touch, and we can get somebody to come along and have a chat, and they can run through a presentation that's suited to your area of the state or of the country, and focus on those things that you particularly want to focus on as well. So yeah, certainly I think that there is sufficient training in that to cover off what people might want to see on weekends.
Yep.
In terms of the resources that are available, we have lots. So we have just like basic information sheets that have been put together by Liz and the team behind the scene, with obviously a lot of input from our beacon industry as well on the basics, how to do a sugar shake, how to do an alcohol wash, through to a lot more information about the varroa mite life cycle. We've got information there about the upcoming training sessions and what to expect in them, and around IPM as well. So if there's something specifically that you're interested in, reach out. But I would encourage you to also just register for our weekly updates, because we've always got snippets of information and updates coming out. And we're sharing resources more frequently as we start to develop a larger repertoire in the background. So reach out for anything specific, but otherwise just ask us for an information pack and we can just share a bit of a general overview of the information that we've got, so that, yeah.
Yeah, cool. We were going to share a slide that gave the audience some information about how to contact the New South Wales Department Public Information team that's built into the T2M program. So you can reach out that way. All of the details there will be able to provide whoever you reach into the response and to the T2M, they'll be able to connect you up with the right people. So this is a great contact place for VDOs, a great contact place to get some more information if you can't find it on the direct website. Thanks, Tamara. Yeah, we do have a huge amount of detail in the background there, and it is a really important piece that, yes, once VDOs start to be onboarded across all of the other jurisdictions, this is still the place to reach out for that information as well, to get connected with VDOs that are actually in your area. And also the training. So the training will be managed from this particular place as well. Now, I think that brings us to the end of our webinar. And I think we've done pretty well for time, actually. I thought we might have gone over there for a little while. We did have lots of queries, but so many were answered through the chat time, and we got through a lot in our live Q&A. So thanks so much. A great big thank you to the team behind the scenes Joanne Cumming, Ellie McNamara, Dave Fairhall, Emily Nordyke, and Janine Kinston, who joined us this evening. And obviously to our presenters, thank you so much for being here, and our audience and our community of beekeepers across Australia. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is recorded, so keep an eye out in the coming days to get information about where to view that from your registered emails from the state in which you beekeep or the ARBIC website. Good evening.